Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and if you want to catch up with me on Twitter, you can find me at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. Show is always free, but if you want to support me on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you sign up, you do get a weekly bonus episode of everything else I'm watching. People ask me for reviews on, current movies, since we normally do people's favorites. They tend to be older, TV shows and other stuff. That's all on the Patreon. And I want to take a quick moment to thank my top patrons, and they are Jeff Woodman, Philip Barker, and Michael Cross. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. Oh, and Josh Johnson. Sorry, Josh. And if you like what you heard today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. And I have a returning voice on the podcast. I've got Chris from Last Theater Podcast, and also recently from creepycatalog.com. Say hi, Chris.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well. If people haven't heard your voice on here, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit? Just kind of telling us a little bit about you.
Sure. So I am Chris. I have been into movies since I was born. My dad was big into horror, meaning I am big into horror. And yeah, when I got older, my friend and I started a podcast actually, we did a podcast about wrestling, but then I wanted to do a podcast about movies, and that's The Last Theater. But that is on hiatus at the moment because I am writing for a horror website, as you mentioned, Lisa, creepycatalog.com. And one of the reasons I love coming on your show, Lisa, is because I do live and breathe horror, but this outlet gives me a chance to talk about other movies that I love. And Japanese film is one thing that I have loved for decades at this point.
Nice. Yeah, we covered Perfect Blue once upon a
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yes, Perfect Blue was the first one, and then we did First Love on the last
Oh,
time I
that's
was on
right.
here. Yeah.
Yes, that was a good one. I like that one.
Yes, it was fun.
Yes, I have wanted to do. Okay, so normally, dear listener, I have my guest pick the movie, but I'm going to fess up here. I picked this. But I was thinking of who would want to talk about this movie, and I immediately thought of Chris because of what you said, Chris, just now about Japanese film. So the backstory to this is I recently finally saw the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, and there was something about the surrealness of it and the positivity, I guess. I guess, like, a lot of times when movies have, like, a lot of mind-bending stuff in it, it's usually, like, tragic or a psychological, horror or something like that, but that movie was unique in the fact that it's got a very positive message, and this movie is similar to that. So it's not, like, the same, but it reminded me of it for some reason. I was like, "You know what? We should finally talk about," and I'll just say the title now, Millennium Actress.
Yes,
And
that's awesome. Like Everything Everywhere All at Once was my favorite movie of 2022. Like
nice.
hands down. Like I love horror, but that won it for me. And I didn't even make the connection, but yeah, I can see how you would connect the two, how one would spark the other.
There is a part of me that of my brain, I think, that every movie that I really like, I somehow try to relate it to Satoshi Kon. I It's like
Right?
a weird obsession I have, but anyway, I was like, "Yes, I wanna talk about that movie," and then I was like, "Well, I have to find someone to talk about it with," and I was like, "Yeah, you'd be perfect because we did Perfect Blue," and
Hmm.
I'm like didn't ask you to make sure, but I'm like, "I bet considering how much you like Japanese film in general that you liked this movie," so I was like, "You must
Yes.
come back and talk about it." So I'm going to say right here that if you have not seen the movie before, I recommend you pause and you go watch it because we are going to spoil it. You can see it right now for free on Tubi if you're listening to this when it came out, because I noticed that when I was kind of searching around. So
Nice.
you're out of excuses. Please watch it. But let me tell a little bit about the movie and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about it. And as always, I steal these. I'm not a writer like Chris, so I steal my summaries from online sources. And I took this one from IMDb. Um, in this animated feature, filmmaker Genya Tachibana begins a work documentary about famed Japanese actress Chiyoko Fujiwara. Now, well into old age, Chiyoko has become reclusive and shy about any publicity, but she eventually warms up to Tachibana and starts to relate her life story. As the decades pass, Chiyoko is transformed from a teen with big dreams into a full blown celebrity, while her cinematic characters span various eras from ancient Japan to the distant future. Um, that kind of, I think, barely scratches the surface, but anyway.
Right. It's
um,
yeah,
you
that's
know,
kind of what happens, but not necessarily what it's about, you know?
Yes, that's a
Yeah.
very good way of putting it. And unfortunately, because I feel like this is a little bit obscure, like I'm always waiting for people to finally see this movie.
Mhm.
But I think like when it came out, so it came out in 2003, and I feel like it's different, but I feel that I mentioned everything everywhere all at once because I feel like we're finally in a period in cinema history where people are so much more open to different concepts and to like, you know, artistic and new interpretations of things. Whereas something like this would have seemed so strange in 2003. Now it would be like, oh, this is just another sci-fi or, whatever movie that's like fun to watch. I feel like people are finally on board for that kind of stuff. But because it doesn't have like a big following the way that some other things do over here, there weren't that many facts that I could pull out. But one that I
Mhm.
had was that the character of Chiyoko is somewhat reminiscent of Setsuko Hara, a famed Japanese movie star of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, who likewise withdrew suddenly from public life. Satoshi Kon has recognized his influence in an interview, also citing Hideko Takamine, but insisting that Chiyoko is primarily a universally human character. So he's kind of based her off a couple people, but he won't commit all the way. She's still his own creation.
Right, and I got a Blu-ray of it of Millennium Actress sometime last year, and this gave me the opportunity to finally like dig into all the bonus
Oh,
features.
nice. Oh gosh, I
Yeah,
need
there's
that. I need to buy that.
it's a steel book. It's really nice. It's beautiful in high def. So, but he does talk about that a little bit, and I thought it was interesting. Like Satoshi Kon in all his interviews is like really humble, I would say,
Mhm.
and just
I
kind of
agree.
downplaying what he does. And like, I think he's brilliant. He was brilliant, and but he always kind of downplays that. And when he talks about the lead character, he never talks about Setsuko Hara by name, but he
Mm.
does talk about researching film and film history. And like you said, he has said that there is a resemblance. Surely there are very clear references in the movie to Japanese films, which I'm sure we'll get to later. But the character of Chiyoko, as far as like Setsuko Hara, he says he even went as far to say is like her being an actress didn't matter as much as the story he wanted to tell. So it wasn't
Mm.
like he came with an idea. I want to create a movie about an actress who tells a story that kind of goes in and out of her movies and her own life and like that. He came to it from, we have this idea that is huge. We want to talk about all these different time periods. We want to talk about this like the main thrust of the story. How do we do that? Oh, if we put an actress in there, we can do that through the movies that she was in. And that's kind of how he approached getting into the movie from what he said in that interview.
That makes a lot of sense because I know that, Perfect Blue was his first feature.
Mhm.
And basically he, really liked the horror and the surrealness of it. And he wanted to
Mhm.
make a movie that was like, what if there was like a positive version of that where it's not disorienting and scary, but like a different spin on it. So it makes sense that that concept is like before having it be an actress.
Right, and that's exactly what he talks about because him and the he worked with one of the producers, Maso Maruyama, and I think he worked on Perfect Blue with him too. Basically, producers
Mhm.
were like, "We want you to make another movie. Can you make another Perfect Blue?" And they were like, "Well, we did the horror side of it, and we know we're good at that. We want to show that that's not all we can do." So,
Mhm.
like exactly like you said, they it's those two movies are definitely like companion pieces. They're like sisters, you know.
Oh, yeah, there's
But it's
tons of
yeah,
parallels. Yeah,
but it's the other side of the coin, basically.
100%. Yeah. Do you know how well it was received in Japan?
That I'm not 100% sure of. I don't think it wasn't like a major hit. I think it was successful, but not like a runaway hit.
Yeah,
Kind of like Perfect Blue has always been it's always overshadowed by Perfect Blue, I think.
I think so too, and I think even in the US, the release was not really super well received, which is why I feel like
Mhm.
a lot of people have heard of Perfect Blue, but haven't necessarily heard of this film.
Right. And I
Um,
wonder if that is because of you see Perfect Blue and you're like, wow, this guy is amazing at psychological horror and thriller. And then you see Millennium Actress, like for general audiences, do they see that and be like, well, I don't know that he can do that, you know, or if they
yeah,
even connected the two.
or if they even know, like, based on the trailer, like, what is this about? They're like, "Oh, it's about an
Hmm.
actress." Like,
Right.
until you actually see it, you don't really know what it's about, I think.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so speaking of that, like, when did you first see this?
I was trying to think of when the first time I saw it, and I know it wasn't in theaters because I know the theatrical release in the United States was minimal at best. It was on DVD probably years later. I think
Yeah.
I was one of those that didn't necessarily rush out to see it
Yeah, same.
for whatever reason. But then when I did see it, it was probably I would say probably around like 2010 or so was the first time I saw it, and yeah, loved it and have watched it. I don't revisit it as often as Perfect Blue
Right,
because
same.
I am a horror guy, and I think that's a one of the best movies ever made. But I do visit Millennium Actress fairly regularly over the years.
Yeah, I think when I can't pinpoint the exact year, but I think it was, like, when I was just, like, a really big fan of his already,
Hmm.
and I really loved Perfect Blue and, really loved Paranoia Agent, and so I
Hmm.
think that I started being like, "Okay, I need to see, like, all his movies," and that's how I
Yeah.
saw this, but I remember, like, it having a huge impact on me. I remember, like, at the very end, the last line of the film, like, cried. I
Hmm.
was shocked. I was
Yeah.
just surprised by how moving I found the movie, how much I related to it. I mean, if you're listening to this, you're listening to 2 people that love movies talk about movies, and this movie is kind of about loving movies, you know? So
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
there's just a lot there that I just really connected with. Um, but yeah, so I guess let's kind of dive in a little bit. Like, what do you wanna talk about first?
Let I think the thing that always stands out to me every time I watch it is I kind of see different things and I can see it differently.
Mhm,
So like the unreliable narrator aspect
mhm.
of Chiyoko is definitely one of the most fascinating things because you were saying earlier that people back when this came out weren't necessarily ready for something like this. This is almost
Yeah,
like dreamlike storytelling. Like
mhm.
what's real, what's not, doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter, I don't think. But it's one of those things where you can see different things every time you watch the movie. So like very early on, you start to realize that wait, is she talking about a movie she was in, or is this
Yeah,
real
or her
life?
life,
Was it
yeah.
both? Like and in her mind, and in Genya, the guy that's doing the documentary within the movie, like, does it matter really if it's real or
Yeah,
not?
right. Because he's just getting her account, and, I had another thought. I saw another movie recently, that was called Bardo, A Handful of False Truths or something like that.
Hmm.
And it's similar to this movie in that somebody's like recounting their life, but it is really surreal, and you're visually and what he's talking about, and you're often wondering like, did this really happen? And but
Hmm.
then impossible things happen in the movie, so you're like, that can't be why. And by the end, you kind of get an explanation of why it's so surreal. But I was like, oh man, it kind of reminds me of that movie too. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think picking like an actress to tell the story through, and the fact that the narrator is elderly, by the time we're meeting
Hmm.
her, and she's talking about something so far in the past, that you kind of have to take her word for everything, but then she kind of ends up getting a little bit confused, like what was her real life and what was in the movie, and like you said, does it even matter? But I also like the fact that, and we kind of touched on it earlier, that, you know, in Perfect Blue, there was like this display of how fame and fandom specifically can be so incredibly toxic. Like he figured that out, I feel like, way before everyone else did almost. Like he
For
could
sure. Yeah.
see where fandom was going. But then
Hmm.
this movie is like the opposite. This is like the positive side of fandom, because Genya is a fan, he is an ex-employee and he's a filmmaker, but he's a huge fan of Chiyoko, but he's not obsessive and crazy like, the crazy fan in the
Hmm.
first
Me.
film.
Yeah. Mr. Me Mania.
Yeah, instead,
Yeah.
he's a respective admirer, and I feel like in some ways I always felt like he was like the stand-in for Satoshi Kon, like, that's him inserting himself into the movie a little bit.
Yeah.
Um And I don't know, I love his character, and I like that part of this movie. He's a huge fan of Chiyoko, and his little buddy that's coming with him to film
Hmm.
everything, like, kinda doesn't care, and is kinda like,
Right.
"Oh, this old actress, defunct studio, who cares?" And then he becomes a fan the more the story goes on, and he becomes more involved, and we become a fan of Chiyoko as we watch it. So I don't know, I love all that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly, I was thinking about it in the previous few days, knowing I was going to have to talk about it for a while. Like it is, and I'll stop talking about Perfect Blue after a while probably, but
No,
yeah,
you don't have to. You
Chiyoko,
never have to.
Chiyoko and Genya are absolutely the other side of Mima and Mimania. Like
Mhm.
it's that I would say Genya is a bit obsessive. He does
Yeah.
get really into his movies, but like you said, it's the more positive side, and he's trying to protect her, and maybe he goes too far. I don't know. Like, I mean, hiding certain things or not telling her everything was probably a
Mhm.
kindness, but at the same time, you can see it in multiple ways too. I think, but just that parallel of those two characters together, and yeah, just another note talking about the interview and Satoshi Kon realized that he wanted to have a documentary crew come in and interview Chiyoko, and that was going to be the framing device for the entire movie. He said, "Well, we need to start researching it," and just so happens that people came in to interview him about the
Oh.
movie he was making, and he based Genya and Kyoji on the people that came to interview him.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah,
Hopefully, they're charmed by that.
right. Hopefully.
Um, that's interesting. Well, also, there's a second layer to this. Chiyoko is also obsessed with someone in the movie.
Hmm.
She has, like, an unrequited love that drives her motivation throughout her life, so that's kind of a parallel to Genya being obsessed with her. It's just, like, 2 levels of unrequited love, and I don't know, that's
Hmm.
just it seems so romantic in the movie to me. I really like that, so
Yeah, and I think it's a very. I was trying to kind of reconcile my own thoughts about it because, like you said, the ending line of how Chiyoko, after searching for this man for her entire life, essentially, she says that I'm more in love with the chase rather than the man, is essentially what she says.
yeah,
And so just think it's like, I think Genya is more in love with the Chiyoko in the movies,
I
maybe,
agree.
than what he sees in person. So it's an interesting, and so I think Chiyoko knows that, and so there's a scene really early in the movie after it goes through like the samurai and the ninja and those sequences, and it comes back for the first time to the room. She and Chiyoko is like Ginya's pretending to ride the horse and Chioko's pretending to run, and she says, "Is it okay if I tell it like this?" I just thought that was a really interesting line in the movie to be
Oh,
like,
I didn't
i-
notice that.
is she doing that for him, or so there's so many layers. Like, how much does she
Mhm.
remember, and how much is she just putting on this performance and keeping that memory of the man who is tied to the key, keeping that to herself?
Interesting. I really like that.
Yeah.
And I like that last line because well, I like the way it ends, like, her final movie is, like, her going into space,
Hmm.
and then when she's there, she says that line, and it's kind of, like, echoing what's happening in real life. It's like her going into space is kinda like her passing away, but
Hmm.
it's also, like it makes you feel like the end is, like, the start of some other adventure. It just seems really optimistic, and then the
Right.
other part of it is I I read, like, this, analysis that I really like that I'll link in the description, but, and it kinda captured exactly what I thought. It put it better than I could, but basically, it's the pursuit of something of perfection, it's like in the pursuit of art. And, like, I feel
Hmm.
like the movie is kinda commenting on that. It's like, it's kinda never done, It's like when you're really in love with something and creating something, it's like that pursuit of it is more important than, like, one single piece, in the same way that, like, I'm sure the filmmaker filming her in the movie is like, he's not gonna ever make the perfect film, but it doesn't matter because it's the creation of it, the pursuit of it that's fulfilling. And for her, I think her career and her life and everything that she did, that was fulfilling enough. So it's like the man sort of came to represent the pursuit of that and not really who she was actually in love with. But I don't know. It
Yeah,
was
no,
great.
I think so too, and I think that there's a definite reason that there's a parallel between Chiyoko and this man who is never named, and you never really see his face. The clearest you see is
Yeah.
kind of is in one of the flashbacks. That's a movie. It's a period piece, and you kind of see his face, but it's plain and always in shadow. But both Chiyoko and the man, they're both artists because
Yep.
she's an actress and he paints, and I think there's definitely something to that parallel.
Yeah.
They're both he's always running a few steps ahead. He's tied to something in Manchuria. He like has political political leanings that are never really explored fully, but that's not pertinent to Chiyoko because she doesn't care about any of that. She just cares
Yeah.
about him. So he's running ahead of her. She's always running after him. So it's like that thing where no matter how fast you run, he's always like a few steps ahead, which, like you said, could be a parallel to both of their art that they created in pursuit of the goals that they were trying to get.
Yeah. And like when we first meet her, she's very young and
Hmm.
he's older. He's like an adult and she's like a teenager. And I feel like there's something to that too of like her memory of him is so different than what he was probably even like because she was kind of idolizing him. And then I think she realizes that too at some point in the movie when she gets older. She's like, I'm not even like the same person as I
Hmm.
was in the beginning. Like, would we even have anything in common, or like, would we even have any real connection? She sort of chases that feeling of how she felt back when she was young too.
Yeah, I think that was. I want to say that's after the key is stolen from her
Oh
by
yeah,
Eiko.
yeah.
Yeah, and she when she goes into that one of her movies where she's a teacher in the classroom and they're asking her, it's kind of a flashback to when she was a girl and her friends were like teasing her about this
Hmm.
man that and the girls in her classroom are like asking her the same kinds of questions, and it's just so different. Like at this point she can't remember who he was. She only knew him for like what, a day, I think,
Yeah, she like
and
helped
if
him out
that.
when he was like hiding, and
Hmm.
then she came back and he was gone, pretty much.
Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
she does realize it, and that's kind of where, like, towards that part of the movie is where it stops being like every step along the way and kind of goes into over the next decade I did all this
Hmm.
stuff and create all these movies, and it's not until the key comes back that we like really rejoin the story.
Yeah, that's true. I like the I mean, there's so many things I like about this movie, but I like because they chose like a studio and an actress in that studio, and you get to see like the golden era of the studio all the way up until its closing and like being
Mhm.
demolished literally as she's passing away. Which is again another like metaphor.
Mhm.
But I liked that, we do see this kind of like war drama with her life at the same time as like the movies. And I feel like, to be honest, I don't know a lot about Japan's history, but
Mhm.
you don't really have to get like the sense of urgency and, you know, delicate political situation that she's in. But I just think that's such a interesting aspect of the film. Like, they don't go into it a whole lot, but I liked those parts.
For sure, and it's definitely tied not just to film history of Japan, but I would say more so the actual history of Japan.
Hmm.
So it's like she mentions that she was born during the Great Kanto earthquake, which was 1923. So that's the year she was born. And if there's a few times throughout the movie, there's like moments where you can time it. Okay, I know exactly when this is, or within a few
Yeah.
years, like the destruction during World War II, you know when that
Hmm.
is. Manchuria was invaded in the early 30s by Japan, so that's when she meets the man. So she's probably around 10 years old or so.
Hmm.
And then, like, the other one I can think of off the top of my head is the on the news after she marries the director and is like
Yeah.
vacuuming the house. On the news, you see on the TV, you see news about an American spaceship, and that
Oh,
was
okay.
sometime probably in the like early to mid 1960s. So you can kind of time things if you're watching along, and if you know kind of general history, I guess. For the Japanese audience, they would get all of those.
Yeah. Yeah. I always, the first time I saw this, I was like, it'd be interesting to see. I don't want to see it, but in
Mhm.
some ways it would be interesting to see like an American version of this, because you could do that with American cinema,
Yeah.
and with the studio shutting down over here, it would be very different. But if you put it in a similar era, there was a lot that happened here, obviously,
Hmm.
at the same time as well. So I just think, man, it just always makes me think when I watch it, like, I wish more people would see this, because it's just
Right.
so interesting. But
Yeah.
um what's another scene that kind of stood out to you?
I think towards the middle, like one scene, one of my favorite scenes is when she it's kind of like a dream sequence. Like after, I'm trying to remember exactly when it is in the movie.
I know the
So,
whole thing is, like,
yeah,
so surreal and not out of order, but I mean, it's not like it follows Japanese history, because she's got so many
right.
movies in the middle of it in, like, feudal Japan, so it's kinda hard to remember.
Yeah, so it does jump back and forth through time. And in fact, I guess I'm going to go on a little side tangent if you don't mind.
Oh, go for it.
But the order of like the genres that she goes through
Uh-huh.
isn't really true to what was happening in Japanese film at the times
Oh.
that they have to be. There some of them are roughly there, but especially like the early parts.
Mhm.
So like the samurai movie, and then when she turns into a ninja right after that, there's actually direct references to Throne of Blood, where
Mhm.
in the shots where the arrows are hitting the side of the castle,
Yeah.
and the ghost woman with the spinning wheel, those are
Yes.
straight out of Throne of Blood.
I
And
thought
Throne of
about
Blood,
that when
yeah,
we covered it in an episode, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is where all this is from." I didn't realize
yeah.
that till I saw it.
And Throne of Blood was 1957, but within Chiyoko's life, those movies would have come out in like the 1930s, which there wasn't really that kind of there were samurai movies at the time, but like not like that. So,
Yeah.
but I think it still works because it's one of those things where we talked about where I believe Chiyoko was just kind of filling in from her own experience in films and just kind of fitting it to where it would belong. And so, like, her fighting for what she believes in is more along the lines of like a samurai and a ninja and things like that. So it kind of has to go there.
Yeah, and there's this thing that happens in that scene. So, like, early on, going back a little bit, when she's discovered, there's an older actress that's very
Hmm.
jealous of her youth and beauty, and that continues. She keeps like being paired with this woman, and she gets paired with her in the ninja one too. And then there's another layer where there's an even older woman, the woman with the wheel that you talked about, which
Hmm.
when I first saw it, I kind of saw her as a stand-in for an older Chiyoko, and even the older woman that she meets is another version of Chiyoko in a way when she's older and realizes she's
Hmm.
past like starlet age. So in some ways to me the women, although they're different characters, are all kind of her somehow.
Hmm.
Um but if you had asked me what scene I wanted to talk about next, I would have picked the same one, specifically because I love the part with the wheel where she tells her, "I love you more than I can bear, but I hate you more than I can bear." And I
Hmm.
always thought that part was just so, I don't know, so moving.
Yeah, and she sees that old woman in reflections like
Mhm.
throughout the rest of the movie. Like she sees
Yeah.
it whenever she gets the frames that image that where we I think we assume that the artist or the man painted of
Oh,
Chiyoko that
that's
she
right.
sees. Yeah. And she sees the reflection of the woman in that. She sees it in the reflection of her space helmet towards the end of the movie. And yeah, I think you're onto something about the that old woman being part of Chiyoko, or at least another aspect, because there is one shot late in the movie where the old woman's hair kind of goes back and she has the same mole in the same spot on her face.
Ooh, I didn't even notice
So
that, but I noticed,
yeah.
like, when there's a part in the movie where she looks at that portrait again, and the
Hmm.
reflection back is her as an old woman,
Yeah. Yeah.
and, I interpreted it as, in some ways she's older looking back going, "Man, I loved when I was young, but I also, like, hate you because it's like that's over for me," you know? And I
Right.
thought it was sort of like a metaphor for also the way the older woman treated her early on. But I read that, one other interpretation is like it's her being frustrated with her obsession with that man too. It's like she loves the way that being obsessed with him and being in love with him gives her this like burning passion, but it's also like torture as well because they never get together.
Yeah, I don't think I would really interpret it like that. I can totally see that, and that's one of the great things about the movie.
Yeah, you
Eh,
can interpret it different ways.
yeah, to me, Chiyoko never really she never felt bad about. Well, I'll take that a little bit back. She does get upset in the scene we talked about where she's saying that she's forgetting what he was like,
Oh
but
yeah.
it's that realization that, well, even if I did find him, what would it be like? I don't really know him. He doesn't really know me. It's this promise of love that I'm really in love with.
Mhm.
But by the end, I don't think she ever really is like despising herself for what she
Yeah.
did. I think she's satisfied with her life
Yeah. That's true.
in a way, you know.
How do you interpret what that woman means when she says those lines, the old lady? Or do you feel like that's just kind of like an embellishment because it's like an old movie with, she's like a yokai?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's part of it. As far as I do think that the old woman is part of Chiyoko, and I think that the like I despise you more than I can bear is maybe just the fact that she doesn't fit into what other people expected of her. Maybe that's part
I
of what
like
it
that.
is, because her mother wanted her to be a homemaker. She wanted her to raise
That's right.
kids and raise a family. The producer that she meets when she's like, I don't know, around 10 or so, he wants her to do her duty for her country and be in these patriotic movies to build support for because this is when Japan was getting back into their imperialism, like
Mhm.
heading into World War II.
Right.
And so that's a lot of what film was in the late 30s and into the 40s was like patriotism and make people feel good about make other people feel things as opposed to you feeling good for what
Mm.
you're doing.
Oh, okay. I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I
Mm.
also like, in a lot of narratives, and including in Perfect Blue, there's like this theme of like, especially with female characters, and again in that first movie, her manager is like incredibly jealous of the main character,
Hmm.
and it's like this, older woman hating a younger woman thing. But I feel like this movie again kind of turns a lot of things on its head where she has this combative relationship with an older actress, but towards the middle, towards the end, they become more like allies and more like friends. Um, and then I think, like, this older version of herself, it's kind of the same thing where it's like, yeah, I'm kind of jealous of the youth that you had, but I love you as well. And I just think that's such a interesting and different way of looking at like female relationships and dynamics that like a lot of other movies don't always. It's usually women being at each other's throats. And like I like that
Right.
this
Yeah.
movie does something different with all that because life is really a lot more complicated than that and relationships are complicated. So I always thought that was kind of a cool aspect of the film.
For sure. And like you said, the older woman in Perfect Blue was 100% antagonistic towards Bima,
Yes.
but in this one, it is a lot more complicated and it's a lot more real. And they both realize towards the end of the movie, whenever the truth comes out, so that Aiko stole the key from her, gave it to the director, so that the director could swoop in and marry
Yeah.
Chiyoko. And the older actress does realize, like, hey, we've both been used by this guy. I don't really have the energy to care about any of this anymore. So
Mhm.
it's not necessarily a happy ending, but that's
Yeah.
life, you know.
They don't become like true allies, but I think they realize, like you said, that they share a lot of common ground.
Mm,
And, that happens like towards the end of the film. Yeah.
you know,
I kind of forgot about that part of it. Thank you for bringing that up.
sure.
Um,
It,
oh, go ahead.
it's also just to interject just a little. It's a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
like the way Yasujiro Ozu, the one of the probably the most famous director, at least inside Japan. A lot of his movies are like that, to where it's not
Oh.
good or bad. It's just life. He
Mhm.
did Tokyo Story, if you've ever seen that one.
No. No, I haven't
Setsuko
seen it.
Hara was in that, but it's basically about family dynamics. And one of the most famous lines in that is towards the end of the movie, where one of the characters is talking about family and how families change and how eventually people drift apart. And one of the characters says, "Life is disappointing, isn't it?" And the main character, Setsuko Hara, she basically says, like, "Yeah, but that's just life." And I feel like that's definitely an intentional nod to Ozu within Millennium Actress, to give that, you know what, this is my life, this is what I did. I was pursuing something, I created great things, and it is what it is.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's such a good point. I didn't know that background of it, but I really like just in general the way that Satoshi Kon, like he a lot of times the protagonist is female, but whereas in like say a Miyazaki film, I feel like, well,
Mm,
because it's a younger audience typically that it's aimed at, but
mm,
like the heroines tend to be like pure and wonderful and kind of perfect, right? And like I
right.
feel like in Satoshi Kon's stories, they're always multifaceted and interesting and complicated. I don't feel
Mm,
like you walk away from this thinking like, "Oh, Chiyoko was like the perfect, beautiful actress with like an amazing, perfect life." You're like, "Okay, she was a complicated person who made mistakes and did things that, she kind of regretted later on. Not horrible things, but just like
mm,
normal life things." And yeah, I just like that she kind of has all these different sides to her, and I feel like that nod that you're talking about sort of exemplifies in the movie, like, "Hey, this has been kind of like a fantastic ride you've been on so far, but just kinda wanna remind you, like, she had, like, a regular life," you know? Like,
right.
the character is not perfect.
And I feel like that's a very Japanese way of making a movie that
Yeah.
certain audiences won't necessarily connect with, but it's very much from my experience watching bunches of Japanese films, like a lot of at least classic ones, kind of in that way, where it's not
Mm,
really about completing a goal or a task. It's just more of a commentary about a representation of life in
yeah,
art, I think.
I like that. Well, are there other scenes we haven't touched on yet? I know there's, like, so many scenes in this movie.
Yeah, I did mention that one scene towards the middle where she's basically it's you see Chiyoko, that sequence where she's like riding a horse, I believe, and then she's being pulled in a rickshaw, and then Genya's
Oh,
pulling the
yeah.
rickshaw. That's like the brightest, most colorful. scene in the entire movie. It's one of my favorites. It looks amazing on my Blu-ray, but I just I really liked how Satoshi Kon uses color in this movie,
Mhm.
and he did talk about that a little bit in one of those interviews, saying that like good memories are usually like bright and like
Oh.
in human minds, there you see details and it's bright and it's colorful, but bad memories or old memories, they're usually like less so, maybe black and white. And so that's kind of the reason, if you watch the movie and you're paying attention to the color, like when Chiyoko first starts talking about her life, it's those
Mhm.
black and white images. There's some red
Oh,
splashed in
yeah.
there. Then when she gets to her movies, even though these would definitely have been in black and white during that time, it's faded out colors. It's very muted, like colors washed out. But then
Mhm.
you look at Genya and Kyoji, who are in those at the time, and they're like fully bright because they're like there in the moment in that room with Chiyoko. I just really like how it all brings it together.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of those concepts get further sharpened when you get to his movie Paprika too,
Hmm. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
because that's all about memories, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It kinda builds off of this one. But I hadn't noticed that, but that makes a lot of sense, and then, like you said, that scene with the rickshaw and the horse and all that, that's like that was in the trailer, I think, too.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like, it's kind of it's a really good representation of, like, what the film's about.
Right. I think that one and the scene where after she discovers that Otaki was the director, was the one who had taken the key,
Mhm.
and the policeman who had arrested the mystery man years ago, whenever he's an old man and comes back to basically
Oh,
apologize
yeah.
for what he did, and Chiyoko sets off on her trek back to Hokkaido. Like I really love that sequence of her running because she's always running in the movie, and then
Mhm.
this is really that moment where every single scene, it seems, is like all like chopped together in this one
Mhm.
sequence as she's running all the way back to Hokkaido. Some of it looks real, some of it clearly isn't because there's a Godzilla monster in one of the shots, and there's just all these different eras like falling together in this one sequence of her, like her last, probably her last great memory of
Mhm.
this man before she lost the key again.
Yeah. Yeah, good point. Gosh, love it. I feel like you said, this is a movie where it's it's so good. I don't wanna say that it's heavy, like, it doesn't depress me, but I do
Right.
feel like it evokes a lot of emotion to where I really enjoy the movie, but I couldn't watch it, like, all the time, because I really
Right.
feel like I go on that journey with her. I really feel it. And it's a lot of tough feelings. So it's like beautiful, but kind of painful at the same time, which I mean, I guess that's what makes the movie so good, is that it can make you like feel all those things.
Absolutely.
Well, have we missed any episodes? I hate to be so quick, but I'm like, I feel like we blasted through it.
Yeah, I think the only thing we haven't really talked about is the key itself.
Okay, yeah, let's chat about that. Let's see.
So at the beginning, so the man is wearing the key as she first sees him, and he gives it to her basically as
Mhm.
like a promise, like bring this back to me whenever we meet again. um I wanted to ask you, do you have any idea of what that key may be for, or do you think it matters?
I mean, it's kind of a MacGuffin, I feel like.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, is it the key to his heart? The key to perfection? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll be honest here, maybe I'm too simple. I haven't put that much thought into it. What about you?
I mean, similar. I do think it's more of the symbol. I think by the end of the movie, when she realizes she's in love with the chase, in love with her concept of who he is more than who he
Mhm,
is, that's what it represents. But there's a shot, if you go back and watch the sequence where she's in the storeroom with the man after she first meets him, and when he asks her, what do you think it's for, she looks down and there's a locked box beside him with all different colors on it.
Hmm.
So I'm thinking that maybe from his perspective, that the key opens that box and those are his paints and that's what he uses to express himself because of all the different colors on the
Oh,
box. That's kind of what I got out of it the probably third or fourth time I watched it. So
that
because
makes a
for
lot of sense.
him, yeah, in that moment he also talks about his friends fighting in Manchuria and paints and brushes don't aren't good help with that. But
Yeah.
that's how he protests. That's how he makes his mark on the world is through his painting. And to me, I think maybe that's what he meant. But for
Mm.
Chiyoko, it's something else entirely. Because she sees the box too, and you can see her look at it. And then she's like, I'm not sure. Like, that'll be my homework for next time. So
Hmm.
I do think there's a lot of layers there. In the end, it really doesn't matter. It's just her connection to him. But that's kind of what I got from it.
Well, that makes a lot of sense if the whole metaphor is like the pursuit of art, in
Mhm.
general. So that would make a lot of sense.
And it's a neat parallel to Chiyoko, who even though she didn't realize it, one other like neat connection between Setsuko Hara, the real actress, and
Hmm.
Chiyoko is that whenever Setsuko Hara retired from acting, like it wasn't clear why she did it. She never came out publicly and said, "This is why I'm leaving." Some people said that possibly due to the fact that she never really enjoyed acting was one of the
Hmm.
reasons. And I think that goes along, whether that's true or not, I think that can be seen as another reference to Chiyoko, who says she only acted in order to put her face out there so hopefully the man will see her and they'll
That's right.
reunite. But is that really why? Maybe that's why she started. But clearly she is in love with what she has done. She has all the memorabilia. She sees the love that Genya has and she kind of feeds off that and they go back and forth with it. So there's something more there that she's not really telling us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely like a relationship between the artist and their audience, but it is hard to tell. Like, yeah, I did think that too. It's like she says
Mhm.
that she put her face out there to get his attention and see him again, but ultimately, I think she enjoyed what she did and she
Right.
was, happy with it
Yeah.
regardless of what ended up happening. It's like it happened along the way. It's not the destination, it's the friends you made along the way, kind of stuff. So, yeah. I
And
like
the
Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead. Sorry.
I like all the ways that earthquakes and stuff,
Hmm.
impact, like, what's happening in the film. It's like the earthquakes are, like, real physical things,
Hmm.
but then also kind of metaphorical for, like, moving the story forward. I don't know. I'm always a sucker for, like, weather or events, I guess, like,
Hmm.
disasters or whatever kind of being the same as, moving a story along.
Yeah, for sure. And that's definitely like the major points, or at least most of the major points in Chiyoko's life were centered on earthquakes. She was born
Mhm,
during one of the worst ever, and she quit acting during one and that scene in the spaceship, and then
mhm.
she died right after one. So
Yeah.
there's definitely a connection there. And I love at the beginning of the movie there's one when Genya is watching that scene from the rocket ship, and I think that's the first time. That's how Satoshi Kon is like kind of planting the seed in your mind that this movie is going to connect movies to reality, because as the
Mhm.
rocket ship blasts off on his TV screen, the earthquake starts. He doesn't really even notice it at first because the screen is shaking. He's into the movie so in depth that he doesn't realize that there's an actual earthquake going on around him. So that connection between movie and reality is already there in that very
Mm.
first scene.
I like that. Did not notice that.
And I also love a bookend for my movies. So like
Yeah.
the fact that it begins and ends with a starry sky and that space scene, I
Mhm.
think I love that. I love that closing the book like coming full circle is I always like that in any movie.
Yeah. A random thought, not really like picking out a specific scene, but one of the things I've always really liked about Satoshi Kon's works is that like his characters look like real people.
Mm,
Like, he has all these different characters, they're different, like, ages and backgrounds and things like that. I always like that about all of his stuff. I mean, you can really see it, like, on display and stuff like Paranoia Agent, where, like, they have so many different characters and they all look so different, but, yeah, like, in this one, I like the way that the director or the filmmaker and his cameraman just look like regular guys, you know? They don't look like
for sure, yeah.
Hollywood caricatures of people, they look like real people.
And there are even those like anime moments, like early when the his assistant says something about, I think something about Chiyoko being old or something, and he
Yeah.
throws a thing at her, and like slow motion falls down. Like that's the most anime I think it gets. Other than that,
That's true.
it's very. I think the designs are amazing throughout the entire movie. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
a movie. It's one of the anime that like you can pause it at any specific frame, and it's like gorgeous throughout the whole thing.
agreed, and I feel like the camera guy and the filmmaker kind of remind me of, like, characters in, like, an Akira Kurosawa film, like
Yeah.
the 2 samurai that are, like, goofy, that you
Hmm.
always have. They're kind of like this comedic duo in the film that are sort of like, I don't know, drawn from Japanese cinema in a way too.
For sure. I didn't even. Yeah, I didn't think about that either. But that could definitely be another reference because clearly Kurosawa was an influence
Yeah.
on some of these scenes. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, I guess we went through all of it. I guess we did it. Unless you
Last
can think of
thing,
anything else. No, go for it, go for it.
yeah, last thing I'll mention, symbolism. I love symbolism, and throughout the movie, if you noticed, you must have noticed all the cranes seen throughout the movie.
Yes.
They're on Chioko's kimono in one scene. There's her Chioko's crest that she has that's hanging behind Genya is a crane. There are physical, mechanical cranes like the machines in that
Yep,
beginning scene when Genya is driving down the road. And the movie's called Millennium Actress, so that's like 1,000 years. And cranes traditionally in Japan are said to live for 1,000 years.
yeah,
So it's that connection and that came early on in the process of developing the movie when they came up with the idea for hopping through time periods. It was supposed to, I think it was supposed to be like a sci-fi movie at first before it got honed down to what it is. And he was like, "Oh, well, this person's living for 1,000 years. We're going to call it Millennium Actress. Is what it's called." So,
oh, okay. No
and
now
also,
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
and also, last one is
No, no,
the
take your time.
lotus. The lotus. Will Genya,
Oh, that's
his
right.
studio is called Lotus, and Chiyoko's like, "Oh, I love lotus flowers," and he's like, "Yeah, I know. That's why we call it that." But
Oh.
also, it's the symbol of purity, is what they say in the movie. And if you notice, the moon base when it opens up, it's a gigantic mechanical lotus flower, and that's what she shoots out of at the end of the movie.
Oh, it's also maybe a nod to Magnetic Rose a little bit,
Yeah, yeah,
since I think he wrote that or directed it.
I think so.
Yeah. Um, wow, I didn't even think about that, but nice. There's just so many layers,
Yeah,
and I don't
absolutely.
wanna forget any of it for sure. This is one of those things that's like, I like this movie so much, I'm, like, terrified to mess it up.
Yeah,
So if
I
I
was like
sound
that.
nervous, that's why.
I always feel unprepared when I come on here because yeah, I love these movies and I feel like emotionally invested, and I'm like, I want to get this has to be the definitive like discussion of this movie. Like,
Yeah.
I
But,
think we did a good job
I yeah, I think we did good. I I I have said it before and I'll say it again. I just he's honestly one of my favorite directors and, like, if you're listening to this, you know that I like anime. Okay. But
though.
seriously, like, in general, he's one of my favorite directors. I felt like
Yeah.
he had such an influence on so many films that people love. Like, every time someone talks about Black Swan, I think about Perfect Blue. When
Mhm.
people talk about Inception, I think about Paprika. And it's like not always directly, but I just mean that he thought about things differently and concepts a little bit differently, and they felt like they were a little ahead of their time. Um, and I just really liked his projects. It's just so sad that there's not more of them, you know?
Yeah, it's a tragedy. I'm sure we talk about this and we talk about Perfect Blue, but like what how he did what 4 features I want to say Tokyo
Yeah, he was, like, in the
Godfathers,
middle of one
Paprika.
more, right?
Yeah,
Like yeah.
they said they were going to finish that one, but it's been what 13 years at this point, so
Mhm.
we'll see if that ever happens. But yeah, it's he's one of my favorite directors too, just because yeah, way ahead of his time, and he's whenever people ask me about like anime to recommend, it's like Perfect Blue's top, Millennium Actress
Mhm.
is up there, Paprika, probably in that order actually.
Yeah.
So,
I think though this is kinda corny, but just go with
mm.
it. Much like in this movie where Chiyoko is sort of there's so many meanings to, like, I think that ending line, and part of it is, like, she's dying, but her life is sort of immortalized in her work, right?
Right,
And that's kind of how art is, and so in some ways, it's the same with Satoshi Kon to me that, like, yeah, he's gone, but, like, his imprint is definitely left and felt, um, and, it's not like I watch these movies and get s super sad, I'm just like, "Man, he
sure,
created some beautiful stuff," and
yeah,
we're lucky that we have that stuff and, glad that we still get to see it, so yeah, I
absolutely,
have the same order I think that you do. I like Tokyo Godfathers too, but it's a
mm.
little lower on my list.
Same, yeah,
Um, but it's a great movie. Like it's that one is really good. It's like a very um touching film, touching
right,
Christmas movie. But
yeah,
it's not like in terms of like what he's capable of, I feel like that order that you gave is probably mine as well.
yeah.
All right. Well, I guess that wraps me up to my last couple of questions then. If you had to summarize, why do you like this movie? Like, what kind of keeps you coming back? Why did you buy a steel book of this one?
uh, One, because I'm an avid physical media collector and am only getting worse. But
I
yeah,
mean, after
it's
what HBO and other companies have
right.
pulled lately, I don't blame you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on the right path. But more so than that, real answer is like I mentioned earlier. I see new things every time I watch it, and
Mhm.
I'll see it in a different way every time I see it. And I don't watch it all the time, which helps to kind of make that happen to where yeah it's been a couple years since I've seen it, so this on this last watch that I did preparing for this show I saw different things about it and like made different connections.
Yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with movies that you can have that experience with, that are complicated and every time you watch them you see something different or find something new. Like sometimes I like a movie so much I'm like that's not enough. I want to go back and get more out of
Right,
it. I wish there was more of it. And so like
yeah,
I like films like this. And I am on the exact same page as you in that it's not like I watch this movie every year or something. I mean,
hmm,
I've probably only seen it a handful of times, if I'm honest, but that's because I just think it covers so much stuff. And like I said before, I feel like I go through so many emotions watching it that I'm like, that would be exhausting to like watch it all the time.
right,
Or that it would lose like the a special aspect of it that I want to keep there. So I just don't watch
hmm,
it too many times. So yeah, I think I keep coming back to it because there's just a lot to explore and it had a big impact on me when I first saw it and so I keep coming back to it. So, okay, how do you pitch something like this to someone that's never seen it before?
that's a little tougher. I think you probably had a good in with like newer movies like you said everything everywhere
Mhm.
all at once. If you like it's if you like dramas told about life, told in a unique way, then this is. I can't think of a better movie than Millennium Actress. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, there are movies similar to it that deal with things with like memories and just the fragile nature of like memories and things like that.
Mhm.
And that's sort of what this is, but it's more of a cohesive like if you love movies and you love unique movies told in a unique way, then this is the way to go.
Yeah, like the whole movie is sort of a love letter to film.
Hmm.
And so if you love movies, that's one aspect of it. Another one is like you said, there's other movies that have kind of done something similar. Like I'm thinking of movies like, Sunshine of a Spotless Mind,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
kind of has some similar stuff in it. Although that movie's a lot more heartbreaking, whereas this one is
Mhm.
very optimistic. But I had seen some reviews of Everything Everywhere All at Once. I keep coming back to that, but of criticizing it, of like it's too positive and like saccharine and sweet or something like that. And it's like
Right.
I really don't like that about sometimes some film critiques where it's like if the movie is not tragic, it can't be deep, because that's
Right.
not true. And I feel like this movie really proves that like a movie can have optimistic outlook without it being, and still maintain like that level of depth that you've come to expect from a good, well written story. So I mean, yeah, I like that about, I like the many things that this movie I think challenges. I really enjoy. I'm not sure
For
that's a
sure.
good pitch, but you know,
Yeah, I
that's how
mean,
I
I
feel.
have I have a hard enough time getting some of my friends to watch anime anyway, so I feel
Exactly.
like I do have to like sit them down and look at them and be like, okay, you need to listen to me. This is going to be a 5 minute pitch, but you've got to listen to
Yeah,
all of it.
I
But
know.
yeah,
It's like, again, that picture of like that meme of Charlie Day and all those
yeah,
pictures and stuff. That's exactly how I feel talking about this and many other movies. Akira
definitely.
probably even worse, but yeah, anime in general, it's like getting someone to get past the quote unquote weirdness, which I always feel like is very lame. But I'm like, you have to just give it a shot. You have to just jump in.
Right.
Maybe that's my pitch. Just watch it. It's
Just jump in.
free if you have
Just trust
Tubi.
me. You know me, right?
Trust me.
I'm
Yeah.
recommending it. Just watch it. That's what I do.
Yeah. I have good taste. I know what I'm talking about. I don't even know if
Exactly.
that's true, but yeah, it's good. Well, Chris, thank you so much again for coming on and for talking about this movie with me. I really appreciate it. Before you go, can you let people know where they can find you?
You can find me. I tweet from the handle at the last theater, usually on Twitter, sometimes highspot underscore 437. And you can find my writing on creepycatalog.com, where that's where I make my living now. So go check me out over
Nice.
there.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you very much.